My name is Richard Capone. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Let's Go Learn. And we're real excited because this is a hot topic. We're going to be covering key steps to establishing an MTSS core behavior framework. And so this is really an overview webinar that we're going to be covering these basics. It's 30 minutes. It's going to be action-packed. But at Let's Go Learn, the reason why we're so excited about this is that, we've always been involved in reading and math assessment, but a big part about the MTSS triangle is also covering behavior, right? And so that's why it's an important part. Today with us, our two speakers are Dupree and Aimee Adams. And you can see on the screen their backgrounds. So I won't read it. But what's great about Aimee and Aimee is they are true practitioners. They come from the field. They've been doing this for decades, and they have so much knowledge and so much practical experience. And I think that's really important because you know how it is. You can get the theory of it, but when you're trying to change your structure at your school district or school, it's hard to do without having practical information. So that's why we're real lucky to have both of them here. They have so much good information. So without further ado, I will turn it over to them in a second. And one more thing, everything's being recorded. You'll get the slides tomorrow. You'll get a link to the video. You'll also get any other information. If we have overage of questions, we'll cover some of the Q&A and put it into writing. And so don't worry, just right now, absorb the information and have a good time. All right. In the very end, we will do questions. Okay. All right. Take it away, Aimee and Aimee.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you for that introduction. And thank you to each of you for being here today. We really appreciate you ending your day with us, specifically because we're talking today about a pretty complex topic. We're breaking down the MTSS triangle for behavior. And our goal today is to give you a starting point for that process. We will start today by sharing our triangle with you. It's very similar to the academic MTSS triangle that everyone is familiar with, but the purpose for this triangle is the same as the academic triangle. The goal is to teach at core, to intervene in the tiers, and to use data to drive decisions as you move students through the tiers, whether you move them up into intervention tiers or back into core because they've been successful with interventions. The reality is we're pretty good on the academic side with intervening with our students and providing interventions, and it's instruction. And it's the same is true for behavior. Behavior is instruction. And so we want to help teachers learn that behaviors that need intervention are behaviors that need instruction. So as we talked about, MTSS is used in about 40 states, MTSS or RTI, a framework of intervention. And so a lot of districts have some version of a behavior triangle that their districts are supposed to implement. And so what we're trying to help you identify, though, is where to start with this. We know that lots of schools have at core a code of conduct or a PBIS framework. And then they have tier 3 systems for FBAs and BIPs, but it's the parts and components in the middle that we also want to help you think about and consider today. And another way to kind of think about this is that teachers, when you ask them to define what happens in the academic core, they're pretty good at telling you what their core systems are and what their tier 2 interventions are and what their tier 3 interventions and systems are. But we want to make sure that that is the same for behavior. So we're going to start by looking at core, and you want to determine core behavior team at your school. So what you want to think about is who in my building can I leverage? What staff do I have that have talents and skills in the area of behavior? And this is critical because you want to have school leaders that can help promote buy-in. I mean, buy-in is important because change is difficult. So you really have to know your staff and know what their talents are to help them move your entire school. So the group that you select is going to be the catalyst for supporting the school with the behavior process and with problem solving. And you're really looking for a cross section of students who are going, of staff who are going to be change agents in your building. Leveraging who you have is really important because so many people have different skills And you don't want your entire fourth grade team because they have great behavior data, but you also don't want your PLC leaders just to be the leaders that are only the folks in your building who are seen with leadership roles. Maybe you have a person in your building who's a new teacher that you want to support with growing some of their leadership skills, but they have a talent for behavior or a knack with students with autism. So it's important to know who you have in your building when you're thinking about determining a core behavior school team. After you have a school team considered, then you want to start having conversations with that team about what your school behavior systems need to be. So you're looking for expectations of systems and structures across all tiers, not just core, but tier 2 and tier 3. And it's not an exhaustive list, but maybe you want to consider your behavior expectations in your MTSS framework. So maybe you want to think about what those elements are and who's going to teach it, or what are your systems for discipline? How are we going to track major behaviors, minor behaviors, and positive behavior acknowledgement? What are those systems going to look like? How are we going to collect that data? And who's going to be responsible for tracking that? It's important to think about how it's going to be taught, how it's going to be implemented, how you're going to monitor it, and then most importantly, how those systems become sustainable over time, because we have students who move in and out, you have staff that come and go. So how are we going to create sustainability with these systems and structures in our building so that we can have fidelity with our data that we're collecting?
So Amy talked to you about establishing the how and what that you have to determine. Now I'm going to talk to you a little bit about teaching, and we need to know who and when that's going to happen. So who teaches the staff? Who teaches the students? How do we inform our families of what our new framework is going to look like and what expectations are? Could be an administrator. It might be a whole administrative team that includes people at the district level as well as at the school level. You could have a PBIS team that works either at the district or school level helping to support implementation. Perhaps it's your teachers or your support staff. My guess is it's probably going to need to be everyone. The important thing about determining those systems is when we teach it, we need to teach everyone, and we need to have everyone involved. It's not just your school counselor's responsibility. It's not just your principal's responsibility. It is everyone's responsibility to make sure that we are maintaining fidelity with our core systems. So when do we catch our staff, kids, and families in order to be able to teach this? Maybe it's staff meetings. Maybe it's your morning meetings. Perhaps during your morning and afternoon announcements, you include a target behavior expectation that you're working on across the school. Maybe there's so little time to squeeze professional development in or those SEL lessons that we make it a part of our daily interactions with our students. It just becomes a part of how we look for those learning moments as they come up throughout our day. Targeted communications are also important to help keep everyone on the same page so that you know how your data is informing your processes, what that data is, and how we're doing as we move towards our goal as a district. The next thing that we want to teach is everything that we just determined. So we talked a lot about determining what our systems look like, what our structures look like, what our expectations look like. We now need to actively teach all aspects of what we've determined. These are just some examples, again, of what core elements in an MTSS framework are. And these are pretty much high-value musts for being taught regularly. We're not going to just teach this once. We're going to constantly review and reflect. What constitutes a major or a minor office referral for our students? Which behaviors are managed in the classroom? Which behaviors require an office referral or administrative support in order to manage? What are the consequences for a given behavior? What are expected behaviors? Is that only something that we have incorporated into our PBIS matrix, or are we using an SEL curriculum to help support those expected behaviors as well? What procedures do we have in place for moving kids between tiers, for seeking additional support as a teacher if I need extra help in my classroom? You need to teach people how to access that, not simply determine what the procedure is, but actively teach people how to engage with that procedure. What are my data Collection systems. How am I collecting data? What responsibility for data collection falls on the teacher, the administrator, your support staff within your building? How do we ensure that we have fidelity to those expectations and interventions that we're using for behavior? All of those things are elements that must be taught and taught and taught again. If any of these elements are weak, the fidelity of the system crashes. And if we are collecting poor data, remember, poor data input equates to basically misinformation. So we need to ensure that we've got fidelity to our systems, to our data collection, and to the way everyone has learned to manage behavior. The focus and reteaching of the most salient aspects of MTSS frameworks equate to fidelity of implementation, which ultimately will translate into how your school does business on a regular basis. So this is what you should see and hear across your building from teachers and students. You've determined what you're going to do. You've taught everybody what it is that they're supposed to do. And now we're going to actually implement those processes. So I should be seeing and hearing high rates of opportunities for our students to respond. I should see active supervision using proximity to help manage and maintain behaviors inside that classroom. I should be seeing both formal and informal systems of positive reinforcement, both that attaboy, pat on the back, good job sticker, and the tickets or tokens or whatever you're using to support a PBIS role in your schools. There should be a continuum of consequences that are implemented consistently and fairly across students, across teachers, and across grade levels. We should have tier 2 and tier 3 supplemental systems and practices that are routinely visible and everyone understands how to access and use. Implementation is daily. It goes from August all the way through June. Implementation must be actionable on the part of every stakeholder in your building. Students, staff, administrators, families, everyone. It takes a village. Implementation is seen, heard, and a part of the culture in your building. These elements should become parts of your daily school routine.
So when we think about establishing your MTSS behavior framework, we are thinking about determining your core systems, your core structures, your core team, from the core 80% to your tier 2 supplemental to your tier 3 intensive intervention. All of those things need to be considered by your core team. And then teaching to all of your stakeholders and implementing. If you do those 3 things, if you determine and you teach and you implement with fidelity, this causes engagement. And this starts to create a cycle of an MTSS behavior framework. So if you have engagement, at that point, you're collecting data. And if you're collecting data, you're going to have a lot of it. You're going to have major offenses, minor offenses, suspension data, intervention data, behavior intervention plan data, progress monitoring data. It's endless, the data that you're going to collect when you have full engagement in your building. But those data collection tools then are points of engagements and then are checkpoints for your team. It becomes a checkpoint then for your team to determine truly the functionality of the systems that are happening in your building. So if you have a process for reviewing your majors and minors, maybe you review and notice that you have a whole bunch of major behaviors happening and very few minors. That might tell you that you need to go and review your core with your staff and redetermine and redefine with them what office behaviors are and what teacher managed behaviors are. Your engagement and your data, it's going to give you a lot of information on the functionality of your systems. Data is also designed not just to evaluate your behavior framework, but it's there to evaluate your students for success in tiers. It's there to help you know that your interventions are working and that you see kids moving not up the tiers, but back into core, and that you have systems in place that are supporting students and helping them mitigate some of these behaviors before they become intensive needs and take additional resources in your building. So your systems have to be strong enough in your building to create really reliable data regarding student behavior, but they also have to be adjusted when your data shows that the system isn't working. And that's really where we get to the end of our cycle. Once you have engagement and you're looking at your data, then you've got to go back and evaluate and adjust. So if you're doing great, keep on keeping on. But if your data reveals that you have implementation issues, then you're going to have to go back and find the places that your data is showing you that you need adjustments. And that's where determining your core team of people becomes really important, because they're going to have to lead that change, and change is often hard. And when you spend a lot of time cementing these practices in your building, inevitably you're going to get data that tells you that something has to change, because you're not going to have the same staff or the same students year to year. So that evaluation piece becomes a true really cornerstone for what you do next and moving forward. So today we've talked a lot about thinking about how to establish and giving you some very basic thoughts about how to establish behavior MTSS framework in your buildings. But what we also want to talk about, and this will happen tomorrow, if you join us tomorrow, we'll be sharing with you ways that you can evaluate the implementation systems that you have in your building and determine if things are happening with fidelity. And we'll share an evaluation tool with you, because that is hard. It's hard to kind of stand back and objectively determine if what you have in place is working. So before we go today, we do have a document to share with you, and it covers what we've discussed today. It's key steps to establishing an MTSS behavior framework. So we will also send this out this afternoon with the recording, and this link will be included in it. But this covers what we talked about as sort of the basic fundamentals that you should consider when you're thinking about how to establish an MTSS behavior framework.
And if we wet your whistle a little bit, learning more about operationalizing behavior systems within an MTSS framework. This is a lot of complicated, deep work, and we actually put a conference on for 3 days. Our next one is coming up in July, from July 8th through the 10th in Nashville, Tennessee. We're dropping a link to that webinar in the chat, as well as being able to use the QR codes that are in front of you. As we've put this conference on in the past, we found that most teams attending find it valuable to come as a team. We build in a lot of time for you to be able to internalize the information that we're sharing and to reflect on your own practices within your school or your district. And you have the support of change agent leaders like Amy and I to be able to help problem solve areas that may need shored up, or to capitalize on areas of strength that you already have going on. We'd love to see y'all here. It's a really good opportunity, and we've had really positive feedback from attendees in the past.
Looks like we have a couple questions too. So let me go ahead. If you have any questions, you could enter it into either the Q&A or the chat. The first one is, how do I convince my team that we should take on a core rework? That's a loaded question.
Well, I think what is most important is, what does your current behavior data tell you? If your current behavior data tells you that you have gaps where you may be suspending a particular group of students at a higher rate than others, if you have indicator data from your EC department that would show suspension rates or in-school suspension rates that are for a particular group, maybe you have a lot of autistic kids who seem to be suspended more than general education students, things like that. You have to really look at your behavior and let that drive the conversation around change.
So I would also say sometimes when we think about who our change agent is going to be, or who's going to lead this change in our building, we tend to talk about that being our counselor, or maybe somebody who's already been responsible for that. And sometimes it's really challenging for that person who has invested so much personal effort and labor into creating the systems that maybe aren't working so great to lead the change in the building. Sometimes having district staff who come in and help change focus, or allowing somebody else to kind of rise up and lead some of that can be also effective in generating some of that enthusiasm for change in your building.
All right, here's another question. Is the behavior framework that you've shared or outlined compatible for any state?
Yes,
100%.
100%.
And
Go ahead. If anyone else has questions, go ahead, enter that into the chat box.
Going to say that it meets some of the most robust standards for engagement with MTSS. So it'll meet even the strongest one.
All right, this is a follow-up question, Amy, to I think what you just wrote. So if your existing behavior personnel are not working, what's a great way or politically correct way of expanding that and getting more resources?
So leaning on that data, right? Don't make it personal or about the program, but really taking a deep dive into what is that data telling us, and then inviting those people to problem solve solutions alongside you in that process. So being able to clearly show with numbers instead of our emotions or our heart that something's not really giving us the results that we'd like to see in the end can be a less challenging conversation to have than when we just are like, well, this doesn't work.
And I will say that if you're able to come to our conference and bring a team of people, one of the things we talk about is real data with real schools where we have implemented change and had those exact hard conversations that maybe not necessarily feel politically correct or like you're stepping on toes. But we, again, leaned on data and what we knew was not working with those particular schools and helped create systems that did, and we can share positive outcomes from real world examples.
And I'll just put another pitch in for coming to the conference too, but sometimes hearing what needs to happen from people who are outside of your building is accepted and internalized a little bit better than when it's coming from someone who is right inside your building or working right alongside you. It seems a little counterintuitive, but it's true. Sometimes it's easier to believe somebody who's talking to you from a distance than somebody who's speaking next to you.
All right, here's another question. You mentioned in your teach all aspects slide about major versus minor, office versus classroom. Where do you get a clear list of examples in those categories for any particular district or state?
Well, a couple of places. First of all, those are things that you would need to possibly decide as a team at a building level. However, you would also look to your district for a code of conduct, and the code of conduct will very clearly outline what are office managed behaviors. I'm sure many of you have reportable offenses as well that go to law enforcement, and then those that just in a code of conduct are defined as office managed. And so I would start by determining that within my building and aligning that with a code of conduct.
Another question, what are you covering in tomorrow's webinar?
We're going to talk tomorrow about what to do when you think you've kind of put all of these systems into place. You feel like you've determined structures, you feel like you've taught things out, you feel like you're engaging with the process, but when you get that data that comes in, it tells you it still isn't working the way you thought it would. And so we talk a little bit about implementation science, what research tells us about how to create and facilitate change in systems, and what pieces of that help to move that process along in buildings.
And we'll also share an outline for a core behavior assessment tool. And the purpose for that is if you have in your building kiddos who are doing just fine, they're following the rules, but then you have students who are way up in tier 3 and they kind of have the building on fire, so to speak, what you can glean from just that generalization of if that's happening in your building is that you are missing a lot of structures in core and tier 2 that would mitigate that particular scenario from happening. And that's what we're going to talk about tomorrow.
Can you expand on what you mentioned about core behaviors being different at different sites? Why wouldn't you have a universal list that's defined at the district level?
So that's ideal. So you're talking gold standard, but that's not always what everyone encounters. So that would be indicative if you see that difference in buildings or sites. There's also difference between an elementary site and a high school site. What I believe is a reasonable universal support for a kindergartner would not be a reasonable universal support for a 10th grader. So you are going to see you should see some alignment across the district and schools with be respectful, maybe an aspect of your PBIS matrix. But when you're respectful in kindergarten, that might look different than if you're respectful and again, you're in 10th grade.
All right, and this is just me commenting. So that's sort of like academic standards, right? When you have your ELA standards, writing, and it breaks down, but then the way you implement it at different grade levels are different.
Yeah, and that's great, Richard. That's what we're hoping people start to do today is to integrate that knowledge and experience that they already have with that academic side of the pyramid with what we're talking about today with that behavior side of the pyramid. Because it's the same thing. It's the same language. It's those same concepts. It's just applied to a different facet of education, which is the need to teach behavior.
All right. Well, thank you so much. It looks like we don't have any other questions. So thank you everyone for attending, and thank you, Amy and Amy. If anyone wants to, there are 2 QR codes on the screen. One is for the conference and one if you want to find out more about our existing system at Let's Go Learn. You can scan those, but you'll also get the video. So you'll get the QR code in the video as well when we email it to you. So thank you, everyone. And thank you, Amy and Amy. And we'll see you again tomorrow.
Thank you.
Thank you.